differentiation and development. And really, the big question about differentiation and development is how do we go from one fertilized egg cell to a multicellular organism? And so really, to do this, there are four basic processes that occur whenever you're talking about differentiation or development in any sort of organism. The first is proliferation. In other words, that one cell has to go to, in the case of humans, something on the order of 40 trillion cells. So somehow cells are going to have to multiply. In essence, this is where you're going from the one cell to a whole bunch of cells. And so what that means is that during this whole process, you need to have some sort of massive amounts of cell division going on. And you guys have already talked about that with Dr. Marganetti, so I'm not really going to talk all that much about proliferation. The second process is specialization. Meaning that different cells are going to have different specialized properties. And so the idea is it's not only enough to go from one cell to trillions of cells. Those trillions of cells have their own individual identities. They have their own individual jobs they have to do. So how is it that you go from one cell type to the multiple cell types that we have in an organism? And the question then is that, how is that possible when you're looking at one single genome? So all the cells in your body have the same genome. However, all the cells in your body look different from each other, behave differently from each other. So how is it that you're able to get these multiple cell types from this one genome? And what you're going to find out is that usually this happens in steps. So you'll start off, for example, with one cell type A, fertilized egg, and through some process, when that cell goes through certain rounds of division, you get two different cell types coming out of it. And then these two cell types are now slightly different, and that allows them to become even more different. And so you can see that by this process of partial changes, you're able to go from one cell type to multiple cell types. And we're going to talk more about that later on today, about how this happens. The third process is cell movement. And in essence, cells in a developing organism need to get to the right place of the organism. Otherwise, your liver cells won't get to where the liver needs to be, might end up someplace else, which is a problem. It's also important for example, neuronal pathfinding. So again, this idea that when an embryo is developing, the nerves have to be able to make their connections between the central nervous system and whatever peripheral part of the body it's going to. And so that pathfinding is all about cell movement, cell motility. And again, we've already talked about cell movement, so we're not going to talk all that much more about that. And the last process, cell-cell interactions. In other words, cells need to communicate with each other to make sure that the proper number of cells end up differentiating into the proper cell types. And again, this is done by cell communications we've already talked about. So we'll talk a little bit about how that plays in terms of differentiation and specialization. But in general, we've already covered the whole idea of signal transduction and cell-cell communication. So what this lecture is going to be about today is really we're just going to be focusing on specialization and how these other processes impact specialization. Any questions about that? All right, so then just to give you kind of a few examples of what I'm talking about, these different processes. Got a few films.
How other processes impact?
So then to give you an idea of the importance of proliferation.